going to talk about 3 principles that I came up with, principles and 5 rules. I'm going to ask you, okay, why do we need those rules? Well, why have rules or principles of having a conversation? Why are conversations important? Why do we have conversations? We're going to talk about the rules for conversational etiquette. What are the rules for having a conversation? Because when we have a conversation, there are certain unwritten rules. So first of all, why is it important to have rules? Why having etiquette when you are having a conversation, when you are talking to somebody, when you are having a dialogue with somebody? Why do we have to have rules? What do you think?
I think if we need to consider what would happen if we didn't have rules. So rules are made for a reason. They create an order and they help us to have first principles before we go out and are able to add complexity further on. So without rules, we don't really know what to expect from the person that we expect to converse with. So we don't know when it's my turn to talk or when it's your turn to talk. And rules give us the sort of grace that we can have a mutual understanding. If we don't have these rules, then we don't get anywhere. We're not listening to each other and we're not absorbing information from each other. So conversations can serve multiple purposes. And if we don't have rules, then we don't even get to the benefits of the conversation, which is extracting knowledge or various other things that you can gain from having a conversation with someone.
Absolutely. So that takes me to the next question. What are the goals of the conversation? You mentioned something. You mentioned information, knowledge, and I would suggest that there are 3 basic goals of a conversation. Usually it's to transmit or to obtain information, knowledge by definition, because you have to have information. That information might lead you to obviously knowledge and understanding, and finally wisdom. You cannot have wisdom without understanding, and you cannot have understanding without knowledge. And in order to have knowledge, you have to have that information and experience. Conversation, by definition, is also an experience. You are experiencing something, and you are creating something, that experience with somebody else. And also awareness. As you are listening or you're speaking, you're creating awareness, which is also part of that knowledge.
I mean, the only caveat I would make there is in order to obtain wisdom, which would be like the highest level of what you might obtain from a conversation, your knowledge has to be rightly ordered. Because without rightly ordered knowledge, there's knowledge all over the place, but there's good knowledge and there's bad knowledge. And if we don't make that discernment, if we don't make that distinction, then we're not going to obtain wisdom, especially if it's on the premise of faulty knowledge.
When you make that distinction, that's part of that understanding and understanding and the ability, it's the experience, but understanding and wisdom to discern what is good and what is bad, what could be. And at times when we talk about goodness or badness, we say this is bad because it creates harm. If it's harmful, if it damages something or somebody, then typically we say that is bad. So I would say that one of the goals of the conversation is to transmit, to also share, to share knowledge, information, and also to socialize. And since we're just having a conversation, to get to know somebody, to meet, to socialize, you're having a reception, you are meeting people in the neighborhood, you are socializing. Also, you want to get to know people. And also, another reason why we want to have conversations is to stay connected. Nowadays, because of technology, it's easier to get connected, but it's that idea of to socialize. And also to create a bond with others. The more conversations we have with somebody, the stronger the bond you can create with that person or with that group. And the third goal of a conversation, I would say, that is just enjoyment. At times, you're having a conversation for the sake of having a conversation, just to enjoy it. The same at times, When you are playing a game, you're playing with other people, you are just doing it for the sake of enjoyment. Now, who you know, then you have a conversation to get to know people. And because you get to know people, usually in life, it's not what you know, it's who you know, as the saying goes. And who you know is determined by who you talk to, who you are having conversations with. That's why conversations are crucial, because it helps us, it's that currency in society. What money is for trade and commerce and financial or commercial interactions, conversations or having a dialogue is to social interaction. Is the currency, and that's why it's crucial to have polite conversations and to find those rules about how to be polite, how to express consideration, politeness, respect in the conversations. And we're going to talk about 3 principles and 5 basic rules that, again, is part of your life. There are no written rules, but they are just 5 principles. Now, one of the principles is to be aware of the feelings of other people, something that I think you mentioned in your introduction. And how would you express that? To be aware, and obviously, if you have to be aware, then you can conduct a good conversation because you are aware of who you have in front of you. You are not going to talk in the same way to an old lady who is in her 80s to maybe your best friend. The conversation is going to be different. You are not going to talk the same way to maybe if you are if you're going to a conference, the way you address the speaker is going to be different to the way you are talking to somebody in the supermarket. There are different situations, so that determines also the type of conversation, but just to be aware of your environment and the situation.
So why do you think that, people will often say that, would you say that in front of your child, or would you say that in front of your grandmother? So can you kind of break that down and why would we make a distinction when we're talking to someone on the type of person we're talking to, whether it's our child or grandmother or a boss at work? Why would we want to talk differently and converse differently with different people?
For different reasons. One of them is respect, because you are aware, again, having that understanding, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, that how you conduct yourself is going to have an impact on the other person. It can make the other person uncomfortable, or the other person might not even understand if somebody is suffering from Alzheimer's. Obviously, you have to be aware of that, and the way you talk to that person, or if somebody's hard of hearing, you are going to talk in a different way. If somebody has just suffered a loss in her life, maybe she has lost her father, you're not going to joke about death. If somebody has just had a terrible accident or is going to go through an illness, you are going to be aware of that situation, that circumstance, out of respect, out of consideration, kindness, empathy, and also charity in a way towards the other person. At times, another reason why we don't talk about certain things is we are afraid of the consequences against us. If you are talking to a manager, you are not going to maybe challenge or be rude to that person because of all the things that how you talk to that person might affect you negatively. So there are different reasons. I would say respect, at times of the being trying to be a good example, being considerate, which is part of the rules of conducting yourself, being kind, being thoughtful, being considerate. And also the other principles. So that's principle number 1. Principle number 2, as they say, it takes, as the English saying goes, it takes 2 to tango. So the conversation, by definition, is a dialogue is a question of 2. You cannot have a dialogue. You cannot have a conversation. Even the etymology, the word conversation means with, and the rest conversation is something to turn. basically you are turning to the other person. You are sharing. You are sharing with the other person. Obviously, if it's you just talking, it's a monologue. And that is important because at times when we are with the other person in a group, it's like in a game. If you're playing hockey or football or any of those sports, you don't want to carry the ball all the time because then there is not a game. And a conversation at times, if it's for pure enjoyment, you are supposed to play with other people, not play on your own with your own toys. You are sharing your toys. In this case, your toys is your experience, your joy, your conversation. That is your toy, and you want to share with other people, and vice versa, to make it enjoyable. So that is, I would say, that's the principle number 2. And then
So just to recap, so what principle number 1?
Well, the principle is to be aware. Be aware
That's
of
the
your
first principle.
The first principle: be aware of who you have in front of you, who you are also, and the circumstance. If you're having, imagine at a wedding dinner, or there is a formal event, somebody's going to give a presentation. Well, maybe that is not the time to start talking about certain things. You have to be respectful of the environment, the timing. So to be aware of all these things.
And principle 2 was?
And the principle is, it takes two to tango. So it's a conversation. You have to involve other people, and vice versa. The other people, and that determines the type of topics you are going to talk about, how much you are going to talk, and vice versa, the kind of questions you can ask, and what are the questions that are going to help that conversation. So if I ask you, I'll give you an example. If I say, nice day today, isn't it? Well, yes, nice day. There's not much conversation, but if I say, oh, today's a beautiful day. What's your favorite season of the year? Or what do you like about the spring? Or what do you like about... When I ask you open-ended questions, then I'm getting to know you, and then I'm giving you an opportunity to express yourself, to express how you feel, how you think, what are the things that you like, that you don't like. And then it's an open conversation, and it's a quality rather than just saying things for the sake of saying things. It becomes the quality of that conversation what it matters. And then, like a conductor, and in a way, when you're having a conversation with somebody or in a group, you have, like in an orchestra, you need a conductor, and you can be the conductor of how you conduct yourself and how you also conduct the rest of the group by asking them questions, and vice versa. So, Adam, so you like summer, what do you like about summer? And then you get, what would you like about summer or spring? What do you like about it?
Well, the warm weather.
The warm weather. And then you, by saying the warm weather, and when you have the warm weather, what are the activities that you usually do in summertime? And then you tell me about your hobbies. By telling me about your hobbies, I'm getting to know you, and then I can also share some of the information. So that is the quality. And also by sharing information, you're telling me what are the things that you love, you don't like, they enjoy, and I'm getting to know you, not just having a conversation without sharing information, without sharing something about you and your soul, which also takes me to another important topic.
Before you get there, because you raised a few things that I want to hone in on a little bit. So when you are having a conversation with someone, some people, we converse with people every day, but we don't know how to converse. And we might find ourselves in a situation where we are one-on-one with someone and we're not sure what to ask them, and we're not sure how to lead a conversation or to really engage with someone who is taking the lead of a conversation. There's some people, they get into a conversation with someone and they're not sure what to say, so they're giving one-word answers, or they're uncomfortable and they're overthinking and overanalyzing everything they're saying because they're uncomfortable and they're not, for whatever reason, they're just not properly acquainted on how to have a conversation. What might be your advice? I mean, you're talking about asking open-ended questions, and you gave an example of that. So that I would think, be quite helpful for anyone who is struggling with that. Do you have any other sort of advice for how people might be able to practically improve their conversation skills in that manner?
Ask questions with how, what, why, and
the who, what, why.
Right, and basically when you say, oh, how did you end up living in this city? Oh, you are not from the city, how did you end up? Or if you tell me that this is what you are doing for a living, and then I said, okay, what do you like about your daily routine, or what do you like about your job? What do you like about your job? What are the things that you find most enjoyable? How do you spend your weekends? Why do you do what you are doing? Or why do you work in that company?
Right.
Or how did you get to know the host?
No.
The minute you say, how do you know the host? Well, we met when we were teenagers. And then you can ask another question. And when you were teenagers, what did you do together during the weekends? How did you spend the time together? And then by asking those questions, opening the questions, you are providing the opportunity to the other person to express, to share with you. And also that leads me to another topic. The things to talk about and the things you don't talk about. Certain rules of etiquette in conversation, in polite society, in polite conversation.
So would this be a third principle?
That would be one of the practical tips. The third principle is be polite. Be polite,
okay.
Be considerate, be attentive to pay attention, but also be considerate, be respectful towards the other person, be kind, and be pleasant, and find things in common to communicate. Obviously, if you are passionate about hockey and I don't know anything about hockey and I never play hockey and I'm not interested about hockey, then please don't spend 20 minutes of the conversation talking about hockey because you're not considering the other person. Try to find commonalities. Oh, you live in this city. Where do you usually go? On what restaurants do you like? Oh, I like the same restaurant. Or what have you been reading lately? Oh, I'm reading this book, or I watched this movie. Oh, me too. And then you can have something in common. And be considerate and be kind. And I mention that because then determines the type of things you can talk about. If the other person, as I mentioned, if they are going through an illness, you're not going to bring up the topic of illness. First of all, in polite conversation, you don't talk about certain topics. There are taboo topics. Illnesses is one of them. Especially if you're having something to eat, you don't want to create an unpleasant situation. No. Unless it's relevant. If the other person says, oh, well, I've just been to hospital, and if they share that information with you, then they're basically saying, I'm allowing you, I'm opening the door for you to ask me. Right. If you say, oh, I have 2 children and one of them is at university. Oh, what is he studying? How is he enjoying the university? What is he finding difficult? But otherwise, there are certain things that you don't talk about. First of all, you have
like the things you don't talk about would be stuff like things that might provoke an emotional response. So the reason you might not want to talk about someone's illness or a death in the family is because it's a sensitive topic.
Right.
And we sometimes get these feelings when we're in conversation too. You know, I know this person has had a death in the family recently, but how do I bring that up and how do I address that? Should I address that? Is what we might be thinking to ourselves because it's an emotional topic. It's provocative in that sense that it will cause the other person to, it might draw emotion. And I think that's also the reason that generally it's a rule of thumb not to talk about politics or religion if it's not agreed upon by the people talking, because they do provoke emotional responses. People have very strong feelings and passions towards these, whatever beliefs they might have.
If it's pertinent, because if we are getting together with a group of friends and we are going to talk about religion or we're going to talk about politics because we are interested in politics, of course, then it's impertinent and it's encouraged and it's the whole point of the conversation. Whereas if we're having a reception or we're having a formal dinner, that might not be the time to talk about those things because you might make the other person uncomfortable or vice versa. And you can create tension. And that's not the whole point of that event or the conversation. Also asking personal questions. You don't ask, you don't have children. Why don't you have children? People ask those questions. How much money do you make? How much did you pay for the house? How much? If the other person brings up the topic, yes, it might be pertinent because they are saying, I'm allowing you to ask me, I bought this house and when we bought it, we pay so much money. And then maybe it can be pertinent. What was it like maybe compared to other houses? Or it might be pertinent, but otherwise you have to be, again, aware of who you are talking to, the environment, the time. So those are I would say, the principles.
The principles, the third principle is polite.
Yeah, being polite, being considerate, being attentive, be kind, be pleasant, and find things in common to communicate. And the idea of communication, the etymology of communication, you are putting things in common. And then find those things in common. What are the things that you both are interested in? You happen to know this host? Well, I met the host in this way. And what do you like about him? Well, this is what I like about him. Oh, me too. And then, and not only that, I would add that he's very pleasant, he's very knowledgeable. So those are the things that it will help to have a good conversation. It was the quality, right? At one point, the conversation ends, and then you can move on to another conversation or with somebody else.
Right.
Now, let me ask you, we're talking about being polite, being considerate, being attentive, being kind, being pleasant. What words or what sentences could you use to express, or can one use to express politeness when we're having a conversation? Because there are different ways. There is even the theory of politeness. And let me give you an example. If you are going to the supermarket, somebody says to somebody, what are you looking at? Well, you are creating a tension, and you are creating tension. And whereas if somebody says to you, can I help you? You seem lost, or I would be happy to help you. Look, the effect might be the same, the idea of finding out what's going on with that person, but two different ways. If somebody says, what are you looking at? Or that's very confrontational. Whereas if you say, can I help you? You seem lost. So in a conversation, what are the sentences that we can use to make it pleasant? Well, the basic ones is please and thank you.
Yeah, please and thank you.
So you can say, please tell me about, thank you very much for sharing that. I never thought about that. Just by saying, I am acknowledging what you have just told me. And then you can say, that is very interesting. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
It could be about something that you don't have to agree with, because maybe it goes against your principles, but the other person has his principles, and you can say, I never thought about that. That's very interesting. Tell me more about it. What made you think that way? Or what was your experience that convinced you of that position? And then you don't have to be confrontational, but you can explore and you can see the other person's point of view. The other question is, would you mind telling me about, I don't mean to be intrusive, but how did you get to know this person, or what makes you think that, right? In a polite way. So those are the sentences that we can use to express that we are being attentive, we are being respectful, we're not intruding, we are not interfering with the other person. We are saying, I'm not supposed to be asking this question, or I don't have to agree with you, but that's very thoughtful of you. So those are the questions that expressions, words that we learn, like going to the gym or playing the piano or learning a foreign language. You have to keep practicing and be aware. Study those languages and then practice. The conversation is the art. The art of conversation. It's something that you have to practice.
Yeah.
So let's look at 5 basic rules. Rule number 1, you mentioned it, do not interrupt. And we do it. We interrupt. And how do you feel when people interrupt you?
I mean, it depends. Sometimes there's a prudent way of interrupting that is acceptable, but then there's other ways of interrupting that might be obnoxious, specifically like if you're raising your voice or yelling to try and get over someone. So there's different ways you can kind of maneuver it. So I mean, when it comes to, I guess, any rule, you have to be prudent about it. You know, you can't be too rigid with rules all the time, because then there's no room for sort of allowing exceptions. But you also have to have some semblance of the rule so that there's still that sort of order underlying the conversation.
And when we interrupt or somebody interrupts us, what we are saying is, we don't care about what you are saying. My opinion, or what I believe, or what I think, or what I'm going to tell you next, whether it's relevant or irrelevant, I'm not taking into account what you are saying, right? And at times, the person is telling an anecdote or a story or something, and they're in the middle of the sentence. Somebody else interrupts this individual, and he's left hanging in there. So basic rule number 1, do not interrupt.
And I think there's also a polite way to interrupt as well, because I interrupted you.
How would you do that? How do we do that in a polite way?
I think there's a number of factors. So if I interrupt you, usually it's because you're exploring an idea and I'm trying to consolidate. So I'm saying, hold on, Jesus, let me ask you about this. Let me ask you about this before we proceed. And it shows, so the reason that wouldn't be perceived as rude is because I'm demonstrating that I'm listening and I'm inquiring further about the conversation at hand. Whereas if I were to interrupt you and say, why don't we go and order pizza? And I'm deviating from the conversation, I'm not adding value to it, and I'm showing that I'm not listening, then that is disrespectful. But if someone else was in the room and they got a phone call and they're on the phone with the pizza guy, and you're talking about the conversation, and the person on the phone walks in and says, oh, I'm making a pizza order, then it would be perhaps more prudent of me to interrupt you in your conversation and say, Jesus, what kind of pizza would you like? So it's common sense, as you say, common sense being less found these days, but nonetheless, I mean, you kind of have to be intuitive and you have to be flexible within these rules of conversation. But there's a right way to do things, there's a wrong way to do things. And I think if you're being considerate of the other person, that's generally a good way to go about it.
Another, you mentioned, again, we are making a value. We are placing value on certain things. We're saying there's a right way and there is a wrong way. It goes back to how we started our conversation. When we say this is the right way of interrupting and this is the wrong way, something that you are spot on. You add value, then that is the right way. You are not. You are detracting. You are not helping with the conversation where the conversation is going. That is the wrong way. Or maybe you can affect the perception of the other individual, or you are being disrespectful. That is the wrong way. Yeah, absolutely. Rule number 2. Rule number 2 is listen attentively and actively. So be active in the conversation, participate. Going back to what you just said, is try to add something. And also pay attention to the person you're talking to and the people you have around. So listen attentively, because they are sharing things. You are open, the other person or yourself, you are opening up to the other person. You're putting yourself in a vulnerable position in a way. So be attentive, be respectful, and listen, and then you can ask, you can contribute. Tell me more about it. How did you like about this? Why did you do that? All those questions that we talked about.
I would just add to that, like, it kind of goes without saying that you'd want to be respectful towards people whom you respect. But I think these rules are especially important, especially in our day and age where conversations are breaking down. People don't know how to converse, and they don't even know the fundamentals of having a conversation. And so this especially falls apart when people are trying to have a conversation with someone who they don't respect and with someone who they differ on in beliefs and convictions. And I think this is why understanding the rules is so crucial, is because we can't progress in dealing with one another if we can't even have these rules of conduct by which to agree on. Like, if we don't agree on the rules and the conduct, how do you carry out any sort of conversation with someone who you don't respect and you don't want to listen to. And some of the most important conversations we can have are when we're dealing with someone who we don't agree with, who might be obnoxious, but we need to be able to follow the conversational rules and still show them, maybe not respect, but at least play by the rules and be civil with them, and let them kind of be the barbaric one who's not following by the rules, because then we're conducting ourselves in a dignified manner, even if the person we're talking to is not.
And you raise a good point. Even if somebody's been obnoxious, we can be the conductor of that orchestra, of that conversation, especially when we are with other people, and then we can try to direct the conversation towards something else. Somebody's been upset, then it's time to say, let's change the topic, or let's talk about, and you can do it again.
Or let's go separate ways, because sometimes that's...
And you can do it in a very discreet way. Yeah. Oh, that's... you can see that, for example, if somebody's getting agitated, you can say, I can see that you are very passionate about it, and that speaks volumes about you. You are passionate about it. Now, Mary, tell us about your holiday. You told us. So in a discreet way, polite way, without, so that the other person doesn't lose face, or without showing that the other person is being obnoxious, although everybody can see that. Or somebody's being agitated, you can just gently direct, and most people do that. You can change the topic, right? So that's another thing, is to show interest in the other person's answers, which is another rule. You were talking about the rules, and it reminds me, as I'm listening to you, is when we conduct a conversation, it's a bit like a game, as I mentioned earlier on. You're playing hockey, you follow the rules of hockey. And you are playing basketball, you follow the rules of basketball, and there's a time and there is a way of playing. And with the conversation, it's very much the same. Or when you're having a formal dinner, there are certain tempos. You have maybe the hors d'oeuvres, you have the soup to start with, or the consommé or the salad, and then there is the main course, and then there is a dessert, then there is a coffee, maybe there is a cordial afterwards, there is a brandy. So there is a whole tempo. There is you have to keep up the momentum, and then how you conduct yourself at the dinner, just following the courses, is very much the same as the conversation. There's a beginning, you develop the conversation, the relationship, you establish that, and then at the end, the conversation ends, and then you can just say, thank you, that was very enjoyable, I learned a lot about you, that's great, and I'm looking forward to another conversation, and that's it. And then it's something that you might remember. We remember great conversations, and that adds to our experience in life, and it makes life more enjoyable. So why should we have those rules, unwritten rules or principles? Because it makes life more enjoyable. That's and also it goes back to how we start a conversation. If you don't respect those rules, the aim of the goal of the conversation is to share information. And if you're interfering, if you're interrupting somebody constantly, or you're being obnoxious and you're being unreasonable, then you are detracting, you are not helping to have a good conversation. So rule number 3, be sensitive. Be sensitive and be tactful, which is related to the other one. Something that we mentioned, stay away from topics that are taboo, or they might make the other person uncomfortable. The way you talk to an old lady who is in her 80s is not the same as the way you talk to your best friend when you are having a coffee or a beer. And also try to avoid vulgar, again, it goes without saying, vulgar topics or vocabulary, because it can create, especially if you don't know the person. If you know the person, the situation determines how close you are to that person. The way you talk to your spouse is not the same as the way you are going to talk to somebody at home in a formal situation or at work. Depends on the situation, on the work. But you have to be aware of the situation.
Why might you say that it's good to avoid vulgarity in general?
In general, because again, it makes well, you are showing disrespect. For starters, it shows poor character. Again, it shows that you cannot discern the different levels of conversation. Let me give you an example. The way when you are texting, you use different vocabulary and symbols as when you're writing an essay, or you have to write a formal letter. The way when you are having to give a speech or a presentation is different when the way you talk at home with your family. So you choose that, and to choose just vulgarity, the topics or even the words, it shows that you don't have enough vocabulary. So it tells you a lot about you. If the person who keeps swearing, and also it makes lots of people very uncomfortable because it's a taboo. You don't have to use vulgar. It's the same when somebody having dinner do certain things at dinner time that it can put off the other person you have in front. So try to be considerate. And with words, it's very much the same. It's a bit like somebody who is an elderly person and loud noise bothers. If you are young, well, the loud noises doesn't bother you as much. When you are elderly, it bothers you. So if you go to a restaurant, you're not going to have the music very loud because it will bother a lot of people. If you have people around you, you don't have to shout because, again, it creates, for a lot of people, it's unpleasant and it's uncomfortable. The same with certain topics and certain vocabulary. So it's just being aware of your environment. And it shows class. There are people who have class, and it's the same. How do we show class? Obviously, when we say this person has class, it's something that is a judgment. But the same when we say this car is good, or this is a very pleasant room, or this is a very pleasant meal, or very good meal, or this is a very pleasant person, is how this person conducts himself or herself, how he addresses other people, how the things he talks about. So those are the things that we learn from the minute we are born. So it might be a good idea to maybe, when you talk about things, to choose the topics that could be interesting for the other person. As I said, if somebody is going through an illness, you're not going to talk about certain topics. What else? Also, it shows knowledge. Try to read. So what are the things we can talk about? Well, read a lot. Try to read as much as you can read what's going on in society so that you can have an interesting conversation. What did you think about what so-and-so said? Have you read the news about? Oh, yes, I have. And what are your thoughts about it? So that's a good, interesting. So at least you have to have a basic knowledge about things to do with politics, maybe sports, if interests you, what's going on, right? So that you can participate, things that you have been reading about or ideas. And also, do not add unnecessary information, too many details to the conversation, because otherwise it becomes a monologue, or even embarrassing bits. Let me tell you about what happened to me last summer. I went to this place, and then if you add an embarrassing bit, it can create a very difficult situation, embarrassing. Also, don't exaggerate. Don't exaggerate, because people can tell. Or don't try to if you went to a good place, don't try to upman the other person. Oh, you went to this place, I went to a better place. Or you have this car, I have a better car.
Right.
Or you know so and so, I know. This is something that, as you said, is common sense, but at times we need to be aware of this.
I think the rule of thumb there is we're not having a conversation first and foremost to profit ourselves and gratify ourselves. We should be more focused and considerate in the other person and honoring the other person.
That's it. It's being tactful, and being tactful is the art of not drawing attention to other people's problems, and be aware of the other person. And also don't say things like, oh, you look sick. Are you sick? Or you have gained weight. Don't be that personal, or Oh, you look
surprised you noticed.
Yes. You look old. Well, are you okay? That's why this is a practical tip. I don't usually ask people, generally speaking, and how are you? Especially with certain people of certain age, because chances are that they have gone through a health issue. So I usually say, great to see you. Oh, and then what are your plans for the rest of the day? What do you have in mind for the rest of the week? What are your plans for this summer? Even if you ask, how was your week? Usually people deal with problems, and at times you don't want to bring back. Depends on how close how well you know the other person, but try to stay away from that. So what I usually say is, nice to see you. That's great to see you. And then I usually don't ask, how are you? Depends on the person, right?
Yeah.
The rule number 4 is be concise. Get to the point if possible. And then at one point, be quiet. Be concise and be quiet. Just, you have shared something, you are now listening to the other person, and just be quiet. And so basically learn how to stop talking. And I think that's perfect. And the last rule to finish and to be concise and to be quiet is be inclusive. Be considerate and be inclusive. Try to include other people in the conversation. It's not just about, if there are 6 of you around the table, it's like playing in a game. Try to include other people. And by asking them questions, tell me, okay, we heard about Adam, about his holidays. How was your holiday? What are your plans for this summer? How do you feel about it? So that's being inclusive, and that's it. So how we conduct ourselves in a conversation says more about us than about the other person.
Yeah, I mean, I would also add, be inclusive towards those who are around as a sort of a social grace and a social awareness, but also it's also good to be exclusive insofar as there's certain people you're going to have better conversations with than others. You know, I'm going to Jesus's place to have a conversation rather than someone else because I value the conversations I have with Jesus.
Thank you.
And it's important to be exclusive with the people you spend your time with, the people who you have conversations with, because unfortunately there's a lot of bad people out there and they're not having good conversations. Right. And they're using excessive vulgarity. They are talking about lewd, vulgar subjects. They don't know how to converse. They don't know how to add value into conversation. And in line with our mission here is to be better. We have to discern and be exclusive towards the kind of people we spend our time around. You know, there's a common saying that you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time around. And it's so true. So if we're having bad conversations all the time because we're surrounding ourselves with bad people, objectively speaking, you know, like people who don't add value and who aren't making you into a better person, then you kind of have to reflect on that and really ask yourself, are the conversations I have with these people, should I be more exclusive, and should I be excluding myself from these people and seeking better conversations with better people?
Absolutely.
And the other thing, I guess, perhaps a rule I would add is intonation. The volume you speak at, the rhythm you speak at, how you speak, I think is so important, because if we're sitting here and talking one-on-one, there's no reason for either of us to be yelling. I do talk louder than you, so I can't really help that, but I'm not raising my voice and I'm not yelling. And I think it's important that rather than escalating a situation, if we're having a conversation that gets heated, rather than escalating, we should think about how to sustain where we're at or to de-escalate. So if I'm getting upset about something and I'm raising my voice, the worst thing Jesus could do is escalate to my level, because now it's this never-ending arms race to who's going to be throwing punches first.
And it's the context of the situation. If you are giving a lecture, then it's perfectly understandable that you are going to speak loudly.
Yes.
If you are in the aeroplane, or if you're having a quiet dinner in a restaurant with other people, then maybe you have to whisper, because you know that if you're in the aeroplane, you will be disturbing other people. So it's just the context the situation, who you are talking to. But that was a great conversation. How did you like it? How did you enjoy it?
It was a good conversation. What can I say?
Wonderful. Well, I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
As am I.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Jesus.
Thank you, Adam.
All right.